Welcome to Skytech-Lens. It all began with the stroke of a pen. On a sweltering August day in 2025, President Trump, citing national security, imposed a sudden 50% tariff on all Indian imports, an economic declaration of war. The escalation was swift, jumping from 25% to 50% tariffs in days, leaving businesses reeling. Financial markets panicked. The Dow plunged 1,200 points, erasing billions and shaking global confidence. The White House claimed the move was punishment for India's continued purchase of discounted Russian oil, arguing it was fueling Putin's war machine. The logic: squeeze India's economy, force it to abandon Russian energy, and tighten the screws on Moscow. The tariffs were set to take effect in just 21 days, giving businesses no time to adapt. The fallout was immediate: canceled orders, frantic calls, and disbelief as decades of U.S.-India trade growth were thrown into jeopardy. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned that $87 billion in trade was at risk, threatening millions of livelihoods. Unlike typical trade disputes that simmer, this was a sudden brute force move that stunned allies and adversaries alike. The administration signaled it was willing to risk domestic pain for foreign policy goals. The world braced for the consequences of this monumental gamble. The administration's goal was clear: punish India for buying Russian oil and send a warning to others. Tariffs were framed as a national security measure, not just a trade dispute. The hope was to force India to the negotiating table and deter other nations from defying U.S. interests. The strategy also played to domestic politics, promising to reshore jobs and rebuild American manufacturing. But it rested on a flawed assumption that India would quickly capitulate. U.S. leaders underestimated India's resolve, its need for affordable energy, and its willingness to absorb pain. America thought it held all the cards, but India was about to play its own hand. India's response was defiant, not desperate. Prime Minister Modi's government declared it would not be bullied on energy security or sovereignty. Instead of pleading, India launched a targeted counterattack. First, it restricted exports of generic drugs and pharmaceutical ingredients. Nearly 40% of U.S. generics come from India, triggering immediate shortages. Next, Indian tech firms hiked rates for U.S. clients by 20% and offered discounts to Europe and Asia, squeezing American corporations. Indian agricultural buyers canceled contracts for U.S. corn, soybeans, and wheat, pivoting to Brazil and Australia. Finally, India accelerated trade in alternative currencies, challenging the U.S. dollar's dominance. The message was clear: India would not fold, and it had the leverage to inflict real pain. This was not just resistance, it was a bold assertion of India's rising power. The trade war had become a test of wills. The most immediate fallout was a medical supply crisis in the U.S. India's export restrictions on generics and ingredients left American pharmacies and hospitals scrambling. Shortages hit antibiotics, blood pressure meds, and diabetes treatments within weeks. Prices soared: an asthma inhaler jumped from $45 to $70, and generics rose 35% in a month. For millions, especially the vulnerable, this was a catastrophe. The U.S. scrambled to boost domestic production, but experts warned it would take years to rebuild capacity. Hospitals struggled to source basic drugs, pharmacists searched for alternatives, patient groups were flooded with calls from people rationing or skipping medication. The trade war's human cost was immediate and severe. The promise of a stronger America rang hollow for those unable to get life-saving medicine. The crisis exposed a dangerous dependency and no quick fix. While medicine shortages made headlines, the tech sector faced its own crisis. U.S. companies had long relied on Indian IT giants for everything from software to support. India's retaliation, a 20% rate hike for U.S. clients, while offering discounts to global competitors. Gartner estimated this would cost U.S. firms $12 billion in just 6 months. American companies delayed projects, lost their edge, and considered layoffs. The trade war, meant to protect U.S. interests, now threatened American jobs and innovation. The deep integration of U.S.-India tech was exposed. Power flowed both ways. Indian firms weren't just vendors, they were essential partners. By weaponizing this dependence, India showed that supply chain power is as important as GDP. The U.S. tech engine was sputtering. The pain spread to America's heartland. India, once a booming market for U.S. farm goods, canceled billions in contracts overnight. Farmers faced overflowing silos, lost income, and the threat of bankruptcy. India quickly replaced U.S. suppliers with Brazil, Argentina, and Australia, locking out American farmers. Even if the trade war ended, lost markets might never return. Rural communities, many supportive of the administration, felt betrayed and abandoned. Senator Chuck Grassley called the strategy a backfire that sacrificed farmers for distant goals. The harvest of 2025 became a season of ruin. The trade war's cost was personal and profound. Beyond the headlines, ordinary Americans bore the brunt. The average household paid $1,300 more in 2025 due to rising prices on everything from clothes to electronics. Consumer confidence plunged. 64% felt worse off than a year before. For many, the trade war meant putting groceries back on the shelf or delaying car repairs. Small businesses, especially Indian American restaurants and retailers, faced impossible choices: absorb tariffs or close shop. Beloved local businesses shuttered, jobs vanished, and communities suffered. The disconnect between Washington's strategy and Main Street's reality was stark. The American dream dimmed for countless families and entrepreneurs. As the pain deepened, political support for the tariffs collapsed. Criticism was bipartisan. Democrats and Republicans alike called the policy reckless and self-defeating. Senator Warren called it a tax on working families. Senator Grassley decried the sacrifice of farmers. Legal challenges mounted, with courts ruling against the administration's sweeping tariffs. Economists warned the trade war could shrink GDP by 8% and cut wages by 7% in 2 years. The expert consensus was clear: the trade war was economic self-harm. The administration found itself isolated and under siege. The US-India trade war reshaped global politics and trade. India's defiance inspired other emerging economies to diversify away from the US. The BRICS bloc was revitalized, accelerating plans for de-dollarization and alternative financial systems. With new members, BRICS now represented 45% of global GDP, challenging the US-led order. The US lost a profitable partnership with India and risked losing major contracts to rivals. Allies grew wary of US unpredictability and sought to reduce their own dependencies. By late 2025, the administration softened its tone, but the damage was done. The world had changed. America's power and reliability were in question. The episode left the US diminished, having pushed a key partner closer to its rivals. In trying to teach India a lesson, America showed the world how to live without it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe the channel now for more updates.